The dust storm came without warning, as it always did stood at the window of her small research station and watched the red clouds roll across the horizon. The wind was already howling, throwing sand and dirt against the metal walls of her home. In a few minutes, visibility would drop to nothing. The world outside would become a screaming wall of dust. She turned away from the window and went back to her work. On the table in front of her sat a row of small plants in glass containers. Each one was a hybrid she had created herself, mixing earth seeds with native species. Most of them had died. A few had survived. This was the nature of her work, failure after failure with small victories in between. Was 34 years old. She had lived on for 6 years, working alone at this agricultural station 3 kilometers from the main human settlement. She preferred it this way. People asked too many questions. They wanted to know why she never smiled, why she spent her nights staring at old photographs, why she had chosen to live so far from everyone else. She did not want to explain. She did not want to talk about her brother, who had died 12 years ago in a shuttle accident. She did not want to describe the emptiness that had lived inside her chest ever since. It was easier to be alone. It was easier to focus on her plants, her research, her quiet routine. The storm grew stronger, checked the seals on her windows and doors. Everything was secure. She made herself a cup of tea and sat down to read a scientific report on her tablet. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded animal. Then she heard something else. At first, she thought it was just the storm playing tricks on her ears. The wind could make strange sounds when it hit the metal structures of the station. But this sound was different. It was high and thin, almost like a cry. Set down her tablet and listened. There it was again, a weak, desperate sound barely audible over the howling wind. She stood up and walked to the door. Common sense told her to stay inside. The storm was dangerous. Visibility was near zero. Anyone caught outside could be lost in seconds, buried in dust, suffocated before they could find shelter. But the sound came again, and something inside's chest tightened. She pulled on her breathing mask and goggles, wrapped a thick coat around her shoulders, and opened the door. The wind hit her like a fist. She staggered but kept her footing, one hand gripping the door frame. The world outside was a swirling chaos of red and brown. She could barely see 2 meters in front of her face. She followed the sound. It led her to the perimeter fence, 50 meters from the station. The fence was meant to keep out the native wildlife, most of which was harmless but curious. Had never seen anything larger than a small lizard-like creature near her home. What she found at the fence was not a lizard. It was a child. The child lay curled against the base of the fence, half buried in dust. Its skin was silver blue, smooth like polished stone, but mottled with dark patches that looked wrong, unhealthy. It had 3 eyes, all of them closed. From its back extended 2 thin membranes that might have been wings, but one of them was torn and trailing in the dirt like a broken flag. Had never seen it in person before. She had only seen pictures and videos, images of the tall, proud aliens who controlled the space on the other side of the border. They did not like humans. They considered humanity to be a young, chaotic species, unworthy of respect. Contact between the 2 races was rare and cold. But this was not a tall, proud alien. This was a child, small and fragile and dying. Did not hesitate. She scooped the child into her arms and ran back toward the station. The child weighed almost nothing. Its body was cold, far too cold, and could feel it shivering against her chest. She kicked open the door of the station, stumbled inside, and laid the child on her bed. In the light, she could see how bad the situation was. The child's silver-blue skin had turned pale and gray in places. A deep wound on its side was red and swollen with infection. Its breathing was shallow and uneven. When pressed her fingers to its neck, she found a pulse, but it was weak and fluttering. She knew the protocols. Colonial law required her to report any contact with citizens to the authorities. The authorities would then contact officials through proper diplomatic channels. Help might arrive in days if it arrived at all. This child did not have days. This child might not have hours. Made her choice. She worked through the night. She had no medicine, no training in alien physiology, but she had a sharp mind, a collection of scientific databases, and a lifetime of experience solving problems with limited resources. She learned that children were vulnerable to temperature drops, so she wrapped the child in thermal blankets and raised the heat in the station until she herself was sweating. She learned that blood was copper-based, which meant human antibiotics would not work, so she searched her database for native plants with antimicrobial properties and synthesized a crude medicine from her own greenhouse specimens. She cleaned the wound with sterilized water, applied the medicine, and sealed the injury with medical gel. The child cried out several times during the night, speaking words in a language did not understand. Its 3 eyes opened briefly, showing irises of deep violet, filled with fear and confusion. Each time spoke softly, gently, even though she knew the child could not understand her. "You are safe," she said. "You are going to be okay. I am here." By morning, the fever had broken. The child's breathing steadied. The color began to return to its skin, silver blue instead of sickly gray. When checked the wound, she found that the swelling had gone down. She sat back in her chair, exhausted, and watched the child sleep. Outside, the storm had passed. The sun was rising over a landscape scraped clean by the wind, everything covered in a fresh layer of red dust. The world was quiet again. Did not know what would happen next. She did not know how the child had come to be alone on this planet, so far from space. She did not know how they would react when they discovered that a human had taken one of their children. But as she watched the small chest rise and fall with steady breaths, she found that she did not care about any of that. She had made a choice. She had seen a child dying and she had chosen to help. Whatever came next, she would face it. The child stirred slightly in its sleep, one small hand curling around the edge of the blanket. Its face, which had been tight with pain all night, relaxed into something peaceful. Reached out and gently brushed a strand of dust from the child's cheek. "Rest now," she whispered. "You are safe here." And for the first time in 12 years, felt something other than emptiness in her chest. It was small and fragile, like a seed just beginning to sprout. It felt like hope. The child woke on the second day. Was in the small kitchen area of her station, heating a pot of broth on the stove, when she heard a sharp cry from the bedroom. She hurried back and found the child pressed against the wall, 3 violet eyes wide with terror, small hands raised as if to defend against an attack. Stopped in the doorway, she did not move closer. She did not speak loudly. She simply stood there, her hands open and visible at her sides, and waited. The child stared at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. Its silver-blue skin was still pale from the sickness, and the torn wing membrane hung limply against its back. Up close, could see that the child was female, with delicate features and a thin, graceful build that reminded her of a young bird. "I am not going to hurt you," said softly. "You are safe." The child did not understand her words. That much was clear from the blank fear in her eyes, but kept her voice gentle and her movements slow. She pointed to herself. She said, then she pointed to the child and raised her eyebrows in a question. The child watched her for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke a single word. Smiled. "That is a beautiful name." She gestured toward the kitchen, then mimed the action of eating. Watched her with suspicion but did not move away when left to fetch the broth. When returned with a small bowl, she set it on the table beside the bed and stepped back, giving space. The child hesitated. She looked at the bowl, then at the bowl again. Finally, hunger won over fear. She reached out with trembling hands, lifted the bowl to her lips and drank. had modified the broth using information from her database. Digestion was different from human digestion, and many human foods were toxic to them. But simple vegetable broth, properly prepared, was safe. She watched drink and felt a wave of relief when the child's color improved slightly. Over the next few days, a fragile routine developed. Was still afraid. She flinched whenever came too close. She watched the human with wary eyes, as if expecting violence at any moment. Understood this. She had read enough about culture to know that their children were taught to fear humans from a young age. Humans were chaotic, dangerous creatures who spread across the galaxy like a disease, taking whatever they wanted without regard for others. But did not act like the monster had been taught to expect. She brought food and water at regular intervals. She checked wound twice a day, cleaning it and applying fresh medicine. She kept the temperature warm, the lights soft, and the sounds quiet. She spoke in a gentle voice, even when could not understand her words. Slowly, the fear in his eyes began to fade. On the fourth day, spoke to in the human common tongue. Her words were halting and broken, clearly learned from recordings rather than conversation, but they were understandable. "Why'd you help me?" Was sitting at her work table, examining a plant sample under a magnifying lens. She looked up at, who was sitting on the bed with a blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. "Because you needed help," said simply. Frowned, this answer seemed to confuse her. "I am, you are, human, we are not friends." "No," agreed. "We are not friends, but you were hurt and alone. That is enough reason to help someone." Was quiet for a long time, thinking about this. Then she asked another question. "You not afraid? Ships come, they will be angry." "Probably," said. She turned back to her plant sample. "I will deal with that when it happens." "You are strange human." Smiled slightly. "Yes, I probably am." As the days passed, grew stronger. Her wound healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar on her side. Her color returned to its proper silver blue, and her 3 eyes regained their brightness. The damaged wing membrane was beyond its ability to repair, but said that doctors could fix it when she returned home. With her strength came curiosity. Followed around the station, watching everything the human did. She was fascinated by the greenhouse, where rows of plants grew under artificial lights. She had never seen so many different kinds of growing things in one place. "On my world," said, "plants are controlled, everything in order, same plants, same places always." She touched the leaf of a flowering bush with careful fingers. "This is wild, messy, but beautiful." Showed her how to water the plants, how to check the soil, how to remove dead leaves. She taught the Korean words for things, for flower, for tree, for leaf, for root. Repeated the words carefully, her tongue struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. "Your language is strange," said, "but I like it." One evening, as they sat together eating a simple meal, told what had happened to her. She had been traveling on a diplomatic transport ship with her guardian, a warrior named. The ship was attacked by pirates, raiders who preyed on vessels in the border regions between human and space. When it became clear that the ship would be captured, had put in an escape pod and launched her toward the nearest habitable planet. "He told me to hide," said quietly. "He told me someone would come for me. Then the door closed and I was alone." "Do you know if he survived?" asked. Shook her head. "I do not know. The pod crashed on this world. I walked for a long time looking for help. Then the storm came and I could not walk anymore." She looked at with something like wonder. "Then you found me." Nodded slowly. "Then I found you." There was another thing told her, something that made stomach tighten with worry. "My grandmother is the high matriarch," said, "the ruler of my people. That is why was with me. That is why the pirates attacked. I am important." Set down her cup and looked at the child sitting across from her. This small, fragile girl was the granddaughter of the most powerful in existence. The implications of this were enormous and terrifying. "Does anyone else know you are here?" asked. "I do not think so. The pod signal was damaged in the crash." Let out a slow breath. She had saved the life of royalty. When they discovered this, they would have questions. They might have accusations. They might assume that had taken for political purposes as a hostage or a bargaining chip. But as she looked at the child who had been so afraid and was now learning to smile, found that she could not regret her choice. "Whatever happens next," said, "I want you to remember something. I did not help you because of who your grandmother is. I helped you because you were a child who needed help. That is all. Do you understand?" Nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She reached across the table and took his hand in her own small fingers. Her skin was cool and smooth, like polished marble, but her grip was warm. "I understand," she said. "Thank you." And in that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer just a human and two members of species that distrusted each other. They were two people who had found each other in a storm and had chosen kindness over fear. Outside the station, the sun set over, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere out in the darkness of space, ships were searching for a missing child. They would find her soon, and when they did, everything would change. But for now, in this small station on the edge of nowhere, there was peace. The warning came on the 7th day. Was in the greenhouse, teaching how to transplant seedlings from one container to another, when her communication device began to beep with an urgent alert. She wiped the dirt from her hands and picked up the device. The message was from Colonial Headquarters. A warship had been detected entering human space, moving at high speed toward. All civilians were ordered to evacuate to the main settlement immediately. This was not a drill. Read the message twice, her heart sinking with each word. She looked at who was watching her with worried eyes. "They are coming for you," said quietly. Nodded. She did not look surprised. "I knew they would come. I hoped it would take longer." Before could respond, she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. Through the window, she saw a colonial security transport coming up the road toward her station, kicking up clouds of dust behind it. The transport stopped outside and a man climbed out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a serious face and the uniform of a colonial security officer. Recognized him immediately. She said as he approached the door. Had grown up in the same city as back on Earth. They had gone to the same schools, played in the same parks, dreamed of the same stars. When had chosen to move to, had made the same choice. They were not lovers, but they were old friends, bound by shared memories and mutual respect. He said, stepping inside. His eyes were hard with concern. "You did not respond to the evacuation order. I came to make sure you were." He stopped mid-sentence, staring at something behind. She turned and saw standing in the doorway to the greenhouse, her silver-blue skin and 3 violet eyes unmistakable. His face went pale. He said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "What have you done?" "I saved her life," said simply. "She was dying in the storm. I brought her inside and treated her injuries. That is all." "That is all," ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to scream. "There is a warship coming, a warship. Do you understand what that means? Humanity and they have never been at war, but if they think we kidnapped one of their children." "I did not kidnap her. I found her and I helped her." "They will not see it that way," paced back and forth, his boots heavy on the metal floor. "They will assume the worst. They will assume this was planned, that we took her as a hostage. They might attack the colony. Then we will explain what happened. You think they will believe us? You think they will care?" Stopped packing and faced her directly. "They hate us. They think we are liars and thieves and worse. They will not believe that a human helped one of their children out of simple kindness." Stepped forward. She had been listening to everything, her young face serious and thoughtful. "I will tell them the truth," she said. Looked at her in surprise. He had clearly not expected the child to speak his language. "I will tell them what did for me," continued. "I will tell them that she saved my life. My grandmother will listen to me. She must." For a moment looked like he wanted to argue, then his shoulders slumped. "I hope you are right," he said quietly, "for all our sakes." They waited together as the hours passed, made tea and food, keeping herself busy to avoid thinking about what might come. Contacted colonial headquarters and reported what he had found. The response was chaos, a storm of worried messages and urgent questions that answered as best he could. Then, as the sun began to set, the warship arrived. It came down from the sky like a falling star, massive and dark, its hull painted with symbols that did not recognize. It landed in the open field beyond the perimeter fence, and the ground shook with the impact of its weight. For a long moment nothing happened. The ship sat there, silent and still, a mountain of metal and power. Then a door opened in its side, and figures emerged. There were 3 of them. 2 were tall and thin, dressed in flowing robes that marked them as officials of some kind. Their faces were cold and expressionless, their 4 eyes fixed on the human station with obvious disapproval. The 3rd figure was different. He was shorter than the others but broader, with thick muscles visible beneath his clothing. A fresh scar ran across his face, cutting through one of his eyes, which was clouded and blind. He walked with a slight limp, and his expression was not cold but fierce, filled with a desperate intensity. Cried out. She ran toward the warrior before could stop her, caught her in his arms and held her tightly, his one good eye closed with relief. "You are alive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When we found the wreckage of your pod, I feared the worst. I am alive because of her," pulled back and pointed at who was standing in the doorway of the station. "She found me in the storm. She saved me." Looked at, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of suspicion and something else, something that might have been gratitude. But the lead official, a tall male with cold silver eyes, stepped forward before could speak. "You are the human who took our child?" he asked. His voice was like ice. "I am the human who saved her life," replied calmly. "That remains to be seen." The official, whose name was, turned to the other. "Take her into custody. She will be transported to our ship and questioned regarding the unlawful detention of royalty." Stepped forward, his hand moving toward the weapon at his hip. "Now wait just a moment. You have no authority to arrest a human citizen on human territory." Looked at him with contempt. "Your territorial claims mean nothing to us. This human has committed a crime against the people. She will answer for it." The situation was falling apart. Could see it happening, the misunderstanding growing into conflict, fear becoming anger, anger becoming violence. In moments, people might start shooting. Then did something extraordinary. She broke free from his arms and ran to stand between and the officials. Her small body was trembling, but her voice was steady and strong. "Stop," she said. "All of you stop." Stared at her with surprise. "Child, step aside. This does not concern you." "It concerns me more than anyone," lifted her chin and met's cold eyes without flinching. "I am the one she saved. I am the one who would have died without her help. And I am telling you she is not a criminal. She is the kindest person I have ever known." The words hung in the air like a ringing bell. Stepped forward, his face thoughtful. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you save her without knowing who she was?" Nodded. "She was a child dying in a storm. I did not care who she was. I only cared that she needed help." Was silent for a long moment, then he turned to. "We will not arrest this human," he said quietly. "Not until we have investigated her claims. I have authority as guardian. The child's word carries weight." Silver eyes narrowed with anger. "You would take the word of a human over your duty to our people." "I would take the word of my charge," replied, "and I would seek the truth before rushing to judgment. That is what our people taught me. Have you forgotten?" For a tense moment, the two males stared at each other, then looked away. "Very well," he said coldly. "We will investigate, but this is not over." He turned and walked back toward the ship, his robes flowing behind him like dark water. The other official followed. Remained. He looked at with his one good eye, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving her." Then he took his hand and led her toward the ship, looked back over her shoulder at her violet eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I will make them understand," she called. "I promise." Raised her hand in farewell, and watched as the child disappeared into the dark belly of the warship. The door closed, the engines roared, and the ship rose into the sky carrying away. Beside her, let out a long breath. "Well," he said shakily, "that could have gone worse." Did not respond. She just stood there, watching the ship until it was nothing but a distant point of light among the stars. She had done everything she could. Now all she could do was wait and hope. Hope that one small act of kindness would be enough to change everything. The investigation lasted 7 days. Officials came to station, searched every corner and examined every record. They looked at her medical logs, her scientific databases, her personal files. They questioned her for hours, asking the same questions again and again, looking for contradictions, looking for lies. Answered every question honestly. She had nothing to hide. She told them about the storm, about finding collapsed at the fence, about the desperate night she had spent fighting to save the child's life. She showed them the medicine she had made, the records of recovery, the simple meals she had prepared. The investigators listened with expressionless faces. They did not thank her. They did not apologize for their suspicion, but they also did not arrest her. Stayed with throughout the investigation. He handled the communication with colonial headquarters, answered the endless questions from worried officials, and made sure had food and rest when she was too exhausted to remember such things herself. "You know," he said on the 5th day, watching an investigator examine his greenhouse, "I always knew you were stubborn, but I never realized you were this stubborn." Smiled slightly. "I did what was right. That is not stubbornness. That is just being human." Shook his head. Most humans would have left that child to die. They would have been too afraid of the consequences to get involved. Then most humans would have been wrong. On the 7th day, the investigators finished their work. They packed their equipment, returned to their shuttle, and left without a word. Watched them go, wondering what their report would say, wondering what would happen next. She did not have to wonder for long. The next morning, another ship arrived. It was larger than the warship, more elegant, its hull decorated with patterns of silver and gold. It descended from the sky with a grace that made catch her breath. Stood beside her, his face pale with shock. "That is the matriarch's personal vessel," he said. "The High Matriarch herself is here." Felt her heart begin to pound. The ruler of the people had come perhaps to judge her. The ship landed in the same field where the warship had touched down a week before. A ramp extended from its side, and a procession of figures emerged. There were guards in shining armor, officials in flowing robes, and at the center of them all, a figure that commanded attention simply by existing. The High Matriarch was ancient. Her silver-blue skin had faded to a pale gray, and her 4 eyes were clouded with age. But she walked with a straight back and a steady step, and when she looked at, there was a sharpness in her gaze that made feel like she was being seen completely. Beside the matriarch walked. The child was dressed in formal robes, her torn wing membrane repaired and gleaming in the sunlight. When she saw, her face lit up with a smile. The procession stopped a few meters from the station. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind blowing across the dusty field. Then the matriarch stepped forward. "You are the human called," she said. Her voice was soft but carried easily across the distance. "I am," replied. "I have read the reports. I have heard my granddaughter's testimony. I have come to see for myself the kind of creature who would risk everything to save a stranger's child." Did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply stood there waiting. The matriarch studied her for a long moment. Then she spoke again. "Walk with me. I wish to see this place where my granddaughter recovered." It was not a request. Nodded and led the way into her station, the matriarch following behind. The guards and officials remained outside, leaving the two of them alone. Showed her the bedroom where had slept, the kitchen where she had prepared meals, the greenhouse where they had worked together among the plants. The matriarch looked at everything, touched nothing, and said little. Finally, they stood together in the greenhouse, surrounded by growing things. The sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting soft shadows across the floor. "I have ruled my people for 200 years, the matriarch said. "In that time I have learned many things. I have learned that power is dangerous, that trust is rare, and that kindness is often just a mask for hidden motives." She turned to face directly. "My advisors tell me that you must have had some reason for saving. They say no human would help a child without expecting something in return. They say you are either a fool or a schemer, and that either way, you cannot be trusted." Met the matriarch's ancient eyes without looking away. "Your advisors are wrong," she said quietly. "Yes, I believe they are." The matriarch was silent for a moment, her clouded eyes distant with thought. "Told me what you said to her, that you did not help her because of who she was, that you helped her because she was a child who needed help. Is this true?" "It is true." "Why?" The question was simple, but could feel the weight of it. This was not just curiosity. This was the high matriarch of the people, trying to understand something that went against everything she had believed about humanity. Thought carefully before answering. 12 years ago my brother died," she said. "He was on a shuttle that had a malfunction. He was trapped inside, alone and scared, and no one reached him in time. He died waiting for help that never came." She paused, remembering the pain of that loss, the emptiness that had lived inside her for so long. "When I found in the storm, I saw a child who was alone and scared and hurt. I saw a chance to be the person who did reach someone in time. I did not think about politics or consequences or what species she belonged to. I just thought about a child who needed someone to care." She looked at the matriarch with clear eyes. "That is why I helped her, because that is the kind of person I want to be." The greenhouse was silent. The matriarch stood very still, her ancient face unreadable. Then slowly something changed in her expression. The hardness softened, the suspicion faded, and in its place came something that looked almost like wonder. "For 200 years, she said quietly, "I have believed that humans are incapable of true selflessness, that your kindness is always a transaction, always a tool to get something you want." She reached out and touched the leaf of a flowering plant, her pale fingers gentle on the green surface. "Perhaps I have been wrong. Perhaps my people have been wrong about many things." Did not know what to say. She had not expected this, had not expected the ruler of an alien empire to question her own beliefs because of one act of simple kindness. The matriarch turned to face her again. "I came here prepared to punish you," she said. "My advisors demanded it. Even if you had not harmed, they said, you had overstepped your bounds. You had interfered in affairs without permission." "And now?" asked. The matriarch was silent for a long moment. "Now," she said finally, "I believe I must do something far more difficult than punishment. I must admit that I was wrong, and I must try to build something new." She walked toward the door of the greenhouse, then paused and looked back at. "My granddaughter loves you," she said. "She speaks of you constantly, of your patience and your kindness and your strange human words for growing things. She says you taught her that kindness does not require understanding, that it only requires the willingness to see another being's pain and choose to ease it. Felt tears prick at her eyes, but did not let them fall. She is a remarkable child, she said. She taught me things as well. The matriarch nodded slowly. Perhaps that is the beginning of wisdom, she said, when two beings can teach each other, when enemies can become something else. She stepped out of the greenhouse and into the sunlight, leaving standing alone among the growing things. Outside was waiting. She ran to and threw her arms around her, holding tightly. She listened, whispered. She truly listened, I knew she would. Held the child close and watched as the matriarch spoke with her officials. Whatever was being said, it seemed to surprise them. Several of them looked at with expressions of confusion and disbelief. Something was changing, something was beginning. Anne, standing in the doorway of her small station on the edge of contested space, felt the seed of hope in her chest begin to grow. The matriarch's proposal shocked both species. She did not ask for a treaty of territory or trade. She did not demand political concessions or military agreements. Instead, she proposed something smaller and stranger, an exchange of gardeners. Human botanists would travel to teach their methods of agriculture. In return, scientists would come to human colonies to share their knowledge of growing things. It would be a small program, limited in scope, focused on cooperation rather than competition. Many on both sides thought it was foolish. What good could come from trading seeds and soil samples? What did gardeners have to offer that soldiers and diplomats could not? But the matriarch was not asking for permission. She was announcing a decision, and was offered a place at the center of it. "Come to my world," the matriarch said before departing. "Teach my people what you taught my granddaughter. Show them that humans are more than what we believed." Did not answer immediately. She thought about her life on, her quiet routine, her solitary work. She thought about the emptiness that had lived inside her for so long, and the hope that had begun to fill it. Then she said yes. The journey took 3 weeks. Traveled on a passenger vessel, sharing space with a handful of other humans who had volunteered for the exchange program. They were scientists and farmers, people who loved growing things and wanted to learn something new. When the ship emerged from its final jump, saw the world for the first time. It was beautiful. The planet was a swirl of blues and greens and purples, covered in forests and oceans and cities that shimmered like jewels. The sky was a soft violet color, filled with clouds that moved in slow, graceful patterns. Everything about it felt orderly and planned, a world shaped by centuries of careful cultivation. Spent her first months on the surface learning. The language came slowly, but she practiced every day, speaking with the scientists and workers who became her colleagues. She learned about their methods of agriculture, which were precise and efficient but left little room for experimentation or surprise. She saw how they grew their food in controlled environments, every plant monitored and measured, every seed selected for specific traits. And she began to teach them something different. She taught them about wild gardens, places where plants grew in unexpected combinations, where flowers bloomed beside vegetables, where order and chaos existed together. She taught them about the joy of discovery, the thrill of finding a new hybrid that no one had planned for. She taught them that sometimes the best things came from accidents and mistakes. At first, they did not understand. Their culture valued control and predictability. The idea of letting plants grow wild, of allowing nature to surprise them, seemed dangerous and foolish. But slowly, some of them began to see what saw. They began to create small wild gardens of their own, hidden patches of chaos amid the orderly fields. They began to experiment, to take risks, to discover new possibilities. And in turn, learned from them. She learned techniques that humans had never imagined, ways of shaping plants and ecosystems that seemed almost like magic. She sent her discoveries back to human scientists, who used them to improve agriculture on a dozen colony worlds. The exchange program grew. More humans came to the world. More traveled to human colonies. Scientists worked side by side on terraforming projects, sharing knowledge and building trust. Cultural delegations visited each other's cities, learning about customs and traditions, finding common ground where none had seemed possible. Children in schools learned about the human woman who had saved their matriarch's granddaughter. They learned that humans were not the chaotic monsters they had been taught to fear. Some of them grew up wanting to meet humans, to work with them, to build friendships across the divide. Children in human schools learned about the proud alien species that had once seemed so cold and hostile. They learned that they were not enemies but potential friends, beings with their own hopes and fears and dreams. Some of them grew up wanting to visit the world, to see its purple skies and shimmering cities. 2 generations passed, the galaxy changed. Grew into a remarkable young woman. She inherited her grandmother's intelligence and her own unique courage, a willingness to challenge tradition and fight for what she believed. When she was old enough, she became the first ambassador to humanity. Her inauguration ceremony was held in a great hall that had been built specifically for the occasion, a structure of glass and metal that stood on the border between human and space. Representatives from both species filled the seats, watching as walked to the podium. She was tall now, her silver-blue skin gleaming in the light, her repaired wing membranes folded gracefully against her back. Around her neck hung a small pendant, a gift she had carried for years. Sat in the front row, her hair gray with age, her face lined with time. She had returned to human space a decade ago, retiring to a small colony world where she could tend her own garden in peace. But she had traveled across the stars to be here today, to see what had grown from a single act of kindness. Began to speak. "I stand before you today as a bridge between 2 worlds," she said. 2 worlds that once feared each other, distrusted each other, believed the worst of each other. 2 worlds that might have gone to war, might have destroyed each other, might have never known what they could have been together. She paused, her violet eyes sweeping across the crowd. But that did not happen. And it did not happen because of one woman, one human, who saw a dying child in a storm and chose to help. She touched the pendant at her neck. "This contains a seed," she said, "a seed from a human plant given to me by the woman who saved my life. She told me that seeds are small things, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. But inside each seed is the potential for something vast, a tree, a forest, a new world." Her voice grew stronger. "Kindness is like a seed. It is small, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. It costs nothing to give, and yet we so often hoard it, afraid to spend it on those we do not know or understand. We tell ourselves that kindness to strangers is foolish, that it will not be returned, that it is a waste of our limited time and energy." She shook her head. "We are wrong. Kindness is never wasted. It plants seeds in places we cannot see, grows in ways we cannot predict, changes the world in ways we cannot imagine." She looked directly at. "Taught me this. She taught me that kindness does not require understanding. It only requires the willingness to see another being's pain and choose to ease it. She saved my life without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. And that one act, that one choice, changed everything." Raised her hands, gesturing to the assembled crowd. "Look at what we have built. Look at what is possible when we choose kindness over fear, cooperation over conflict, hope over hatred. 2 worlds, once enemies, now partners. 2 species, once strangers, now friends. All of this began with a single act of compassion." She lowered her hands and smiled. "My grandmother once believed that humans were incapable of true selflessness. She was wrong. She learned that she was wrong because one human showed her a different truth. And now I ask all of you, human and alike, What truths have you refused to see? What possibilities have you closed yourself to? What might you build if you chose kindness instead of fear? She stepped back from the podium. The hall erupted in applause. Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds departed, found sitting alone in the garden outside the hall. The old woman was looking up at the stars, her expression peaceful. Sat beside her. "Thank you for coming," she said. Smiled, "I would not have missed it for anything." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of ships passing overhead, bridges of steel and light connecting the worlds. "I still have the seeds you gave me," said. "I planted some of them in my garden They grew into beautiful flowers, purple and silver, like nothing my people had ever seen." "I am glad," said. Looked at her with soft eyes. "I never properly thanked you for everything." Shook her head. "You thank me every day by living, by growing, by becoming who you are." She reached out and took his hand, her old fingers wrapping around the smooth silver-blue skin. "That is all the thanks I ever needed." The stars continued to burn overhead, vast and eternal. But between them, something new had grown, a bridge built from a single act of kindness, spanning the darkness between worlds. Years later, when passed away peacefully in her garden, traveled across the galaxy to speak at her memorial. Thousands attended, humans and alike, all of them touched in some way by the ripples of one woman's compassion. At the end of the ceremony, planted a seed in the earth besides resting place, a seed from the carried across the stars. "You taught me that seeds are small things," said softly, "but inside each seed is the potential for something vast, a tree, a forest, a new world." She stood and looked up at the sky. "Thank you for planting the seed that grew into everything we have become. Thank you for showing us what kindness can do." The wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers from a dozen worlds. And somewhere in the vast and endless universe, the seeds of kindness continued to grow.